All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. Imagine the year is 2015. An international team of scientists working on the Scan Pyramids project decides to do something completely unprecedented. They send these miniature robotic cameras up an impossibly narrow 8-inch shaft deep inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. So the robot creeps about 200 feet up into this pitch black, suffocating darkness, literally a place no human has seen in millennia. And then suddenly it stops. The path is completely blocked by a mysterious, ancient stone door, and it's fitted with these two tantalizing copper pins. Now, you know they didn't just stop there, right? Scientists carefully drilled a tiny hole straight through that first door and slipped an endoscopic camera inside, hoping to finally uncover a massive secret. And what do they actually find? Another impenetrable stone barrier, a second door. So to really understand what this ancient civilization was trying so desperately to hide and how they even managed to build such enigmatic structures in the first place, we need to rewind. We're going to go all the way back 8,000 years just to see how they even survived long enough to become a superpower. And looking back brilliantly illustrates just how violently our planet can change. Because around 11,000 BC, the Sahara wasn't a desert at all. We actually call this the African humid period. It was this lush, green savanna filled with massive lakes where nomadic tribes were living in total harmony with nature. But then, right around 5500 BC, the Earth's axis shifted, just a tiny, tiny fraction of a degree. It was a microscopic change, sure, but it permanently moved the Africa monsoons. The lakes turned to absolute mud, the forests completely burned away into the deadly, scorching Sahara Desert we know today, forcing all these desperate, thirsty tribes to literally run for their lives. Here is the truly wild part, though. This climate disaster actually sparked human evolution. These migrating tribes were wandering the searing sands, watching their people perish left and right, when they finally stumbled upon a total miracle, cutting straight through the desert, a massive, endless blue line, the Nile River. Now, at the time, they probably thought they just found a lucky place to drink. They had absolutely no idea that this river was going to force them to evolve from desperate nomadic hunters into stationary, brilliant engineers. They actually solved their very first massive hurdle brilliantly. You see, the Nile flooded violently every single year. But when those waters were seeded, they left behind this incredibly thick, black, fertile mud that had washed all the way down from the Ethiopian mountains. They quickly realized that just dropping wheat and barley seeds into this mud created instant food. The catch? That mud baked into rock-hard clay under the scorching sun, which totally killed the crops. So, what did they do? They became the world's first engineers. They figured out how to dig irrigation canals to trap the floodwaters and keep the soil moist. This one single invention created literal mountains of surplus grain. But as it turns out, surviving brought a brand new, very dangerous problem. Part 1. Rise of the Pharaohs, Order from Chaos. Okay, so picture this. Mountains of stored grain act like a giant beacon. The scent of all that newly created wealth attracted vicious, starving raiders from the deep desert who started attacking these new farming settlements. Naturally, the farmers needed protectors, and that led directly to the rise of strong rulers. Right around 3000 BC, a mighty ruler named King Narmer actually united the upper and lower regions into one massive Egyptian empire. But here's the thing, you can't just control thousands of people with a bunch of swords. You need psychology. So the rulers introduced Ma'at, this profound concept of justice, truth, and cosmic balance. They convinced the masses that without the ruler actively maintaining this cosmic system, the entire world would just crumble into chaos. It was quite literally the ultimate psychological control mechanism. And it worked. This unified society exploded into unimaginable wealth. They were trading their excess grain, luxurious soft linen, and papyrus for things like heavy Lebanon cedar wood, shiny Sinai copper, and literal tons of gold from the Nubian desert. They figured out how to build massive boats out of papyrus reeds, which effectively turned the Nile into the ancient world's busiest trade highway. Egypt became an absolute, undisputed economic superpower. In fact, they got so incredibly rich that they had to invent a completely new written language, hieroglyphics, just to keep track of their taxes and massive inventory. Crazy, right? Part 2. Defeating death through mummies. But here is where we hit a massive existential crisis. All the gold in Nubia couldn't protect these self-proclaimed god kings from the one thing every single human has to face: death. They had convinced the entire public that they were literal gods on Earth. But if a pharaoh died, aged, and rotted in the sand like any normal person, well, that divine illusion would instantly shatter and their whole political empire would totally collapse. So they spun this terrifying narrative. They told the public that when the pharaoh dies, his physical body absolutely must be preserved so he can safely reach the sun god, Ra. If his body decayed, he couldn't make the journey. And if that happened, the sun god would be furious, the Nile would dry up, and everyone would perish. Obviously, the public gladly went to work to save their world. The mummification process they used to defeat decay was an absolute masterclass in ancient chemistry. Warning, it's a bit gruesome. First, they'd actually extract the brain straight through the nose using a long iron hook. Second, they removed all the moisture-heavy organs like the liver and stomach, but they deliberately left the heart inside because they genuinely believed it contained the person's soul and mind. Third, they'd pack the body in special salt for 40 whole days to entirely dehydrate it. And finally, they'd coat it in cedar oil and resin, wrapping it super tightly in endless meters of linen. But here's the kicker. Preserving the body was really only half the battle. They still needed an impenetrable vault to put it in.
Part 3. Pyramid Evolution. Trial and Error.
Now, they definitely didn't just build the Great Pyramid overnight. It was a massive process of trial and error. Early kings were actually buried under these flat mud brick tombs called mastabas. But punishing desert winds basically erased them, and robbers broke in way too easily. Then along comes this genius engineer named Imhotep. He had the brilliant idea to stack stone mastabas on top of each other to create the step pyramid, which was basically humanity's first artificial mountain. Later builders wanted a perfectly smooth pyramid, but they totally botched the math with a super steep 54-degree angle. The structure buckled and failed. Today, we aptly call it the bent pyramid. But learning from that massive failure, they adjusted the math and successfully built the first perfectly smooth monument, the Red Pyramid. And it was this exact engineering evolution that set the stage for Pharaoh Khufu. He wanted something that completely defied logic. So he ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. This thing stood an unbelievable 50 stories high. And get this, it was made from an astonishing 2.3 million individual stone blocks. Let that sink in for a second. So, here is the million-dollar question regarding logistics. The white limestone came from just across the river, sure. But the massive red granite blocks for the king's chamber weighed up to 50 tons each, and they came from Aswan, that is 800 kilometers away. How in the world do you move a 50-ton rock across an entire country when your civilization literally hasn't even invented the wheel yet and has absolutely zero iron machinery? The answer is actually a stunningly elegant life hack using physics. Water plus desert sand equals zero friction. They use the massive Nile floods to float these colossal stones on riverboats straight to the Giza Plateau. Then, this massive army of highly skilled artisans and farmers, and no, they weren't slaves, placed these giant blocks onto wooden sledges. By constantly pouring water on the sand directly in front of the sledge, they created a slick, frictionless surface. This allowed human muscle alone to drag these mathematically impossible weights up huge earthen ramps. It's just brilliant. Part 4. Tomb robbers and stolen treasures. But for all their architectural genius, these massive monuments had one catastrophic flaw. Think about it. Building a 50-story stone mountain to protect your treasure acts exactly like a giant neon signboard for thieves. As soon as a pharaoh's political power weakened even a little bit, vicious tomb robbers broke straight through the heavy stone doors, ripped apart the mummies, and stole thousands of kilos of gold. Nearly all ancient pyramids were completely ransacked. Terrified by this reality, later pharaohs completely abandoned pyramid building altogether. Instead, they opted for total, absolute secrecy, deciding to bury their dead deep underground in an isolated, hidden location we now know as the Valley of the Kings. And that strategic shift to secrecy directly led to perhaps the most electrifying moment in archaeological history. It's 1922. British archaeologist Howard Carter is digging in the Valley of the Kings when he suddenly uncovers a hidden, sealed door. He drills a tiny hole, holds up a flickering candle, and peers into a tomb that hasn't been touched in 3,000 years. When his crew frantically asked if he could see anything, Carter uttered those legendary words, "Yes, wonderful things." He had just discovered the tomb of the 19-year-old King Tutankhamun. The sheer wealth hidden inside this relatively tiny tomb was absolutely blinding. Over 5,000 priceless artifacts were crammed from floor to ceiling. We're talking solid gold chariots, magical weapons explicitly meant for the afterlife, and of course, King Tut's mummy was wearing a stunning death mask crafted from 10 kilograms of pure, solid gold. Now, what you really need to take away from this is a staggering thought. King Tut was just a minor, politically weak ruler who died super young. If this was his treasure, imagine what kind of unimaginable, world-altering wealth must have originally been sealed inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. Part 5. Unsolved Mysteries of the Great Pyramid. Which brings us right back to the most perplexing part of our explainer today. When modern explorers finally reached the king's chamber in the very center of the Great Pyramid, it was empty. No mummy, no treasure, not even a single hieroglyphic carved on the wall. This total void of evidence has sparked massive modern debates over what the pyramid actually was in the first place. Was it simply a looted tomb? Or, as the Orion correlation theory suggests, was it this incredibly precise map of the stars, perfectly mimicking Orion's belt without ever using telescopes? Other theories even debate if the specific use of red granite and white limestone meant it was some kind of ancient energy structure. Now, while historians haven't found proof of ancient electricity, the sheer mathematical impossibility of the pyramid keeps these fierce, fascinating debates alive today. And honestly, modern science is only deepening the mystery. Remember the Scan Pyramids project with those robotic cameras we talked about at the very beginning? Well, using highly advanced scanning technology, those exact same scientists recently uncovered something that sent shockwaves through the entire world. They found a massive, completely unreachable void, an entirely empty space hidden deep within the stones of the Great Pyramid. It is a hidden chamber that absolutely no human has set foot inside for over 4,500 years. And that leaves us with a truly haunting thought. We live in an era where we've mapped the human genome, we've sent probes entirely out of our solar system, and we carry artificial intelligence in our pockets. Yet, right here on planet Earth, the ancient Egyptians still hold secrets that manage to baffle our brightest modern minds. What exactly is inside that void? What is hiding behind that copper-pinned door? Are the greatest secrets of human history still sealed behind a stone door, just waiting in the dark? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and keep your curiosity alive.